Hi, everyone. Harry here to give you a somewhat more leisurely report on the court day in New York versus Trump. I'm sorry for the short and loud quick accounts from earlier, but it was the best we could sort of find in the streets around the courthouse, which are, by the way, really hugely locked down, all kinds of security from blocks away. You get the police barriers and the like. But today, so I told you about it, but the morning standoff or confrontation over the gag order was fairly high drama. This is the precise point that I've talked about for over a year, when the judge really decides we are at the end of the line next time. And Merchan he said it, and his credibility and integrity are on the line. I think he made a wise decision that, with only $1,000 of violation to work with, why continue to mess around and give Trump a little bit more room and more room. The fact is, we're coming to this point, and if Trump wants to go to jail, he will. Now, does he want to go to jail? I mean, I think there's two situations that would land him there. And the very first time he'd be there, I think, would be, a short stay, maybe in the holding cell. But on the one hand, you might think he might think it's to his political benefit. Or Trump watchers might think, even if he doesn't, he just can't stop himself, especially when Donald Trump or possibly especially when Michael Cohen or possibly Stormy Daniels take the stand. There's a pretty good podcast we dropped on Talking Feds today, and it's with Norm Ornstein, Michael Steele, and Zoe Lofgren, and they express different views. But Norm Ornstein has a really good point that, it's physically humiliating for him. That no hairdresser, and he goes through a lot to present himself in public, and that wouldn't be available to him, and that's got to be quite the humiliation. Not to mention all the circumstances of a jail cell. So I think that he is chastened and will try. My best guess would be he's not going to want to put himself in jail, and he'll try to straighten up and fly right. But there's the sort of Tourette's aspect of Trump, and you just don't know if he can, hold it in. But anyway, it was a moment of real drama in court when Merchan soft-spoken, but he addresses Trump directly. Mr. Trump, the last thing I want to do is put you in jail. You're the former president. You may be our next president, but I have a job to do. And I mean, it was really, before we've had tongue wagging from judges, and we've had them say to the lawyers, you really need to control your client. This was the drama of a direct address. I'm not kidding here, Donald Trump. And, I think he's not kidding. So that was pretty big. Now, two more witnesses. Jeff McConney, who is the very long time Trump guy, Jeff just under Allen Weisselberg, the controller, the sort of more like elevated accountant, not quite a CFO like Weisselberg. And then the woman who basically her job was issuing checks. And there was, as people have noted, it was something of a slog, but I thought it was fairly important, and I would call it less a sort of a boring day than a kind of nuts and bolts day. It wasn't the sort of day where the Trump guys made the government, go through ridiculous threshold steps to show evidentiary requirements. It's rather that to prove the crimes and 34 different violations, You need to, here's one invoice, here's another invoice, here's another invoice, here's another invoice. And all of them were, payable to Cohen per the retainer, of which there was none, and for work done in, all through 2017, of which there was none. So for legal services in January, February, March, April, etc. So it, made it quite clear that the whole thing was phony. Maybe the highlight of the day, other than the gag order, was the introduction of a piece of evidence with Allen Weisselberg's handwriting, and McConney was able to authenticate or say, that's Weisselberg's handwriting, I know it well. And you had Weisselberg's calculations that took the 130 payout to Stormy, added 50 for another payout, doubled that, and it said grossed up in a way that is understood to make him whole for taxes, which in New York City, when you add everything together, state, federal, local taxes, it comes to about 50%. And then from there, his bonus, which he had agitated for, remember, and we knew that through Pecker. So you had in Weisselberg's hand these calculations, and he wrote it down and then instructed McConney to keep it in the file, and McConney kept it in a locked drawer in his office. So it was an important document, but one that they didn't want to publicize. And then, going through, it just seemed a useful exercise each time they had these invoices. And McConney would so Cohen would write to Weisselberg, and Weisselberg it's all very cagey, would just forward it to McConney. McConney took that as approval. Because, what's basically happening here is you have to jam this illegal and fraudulent payouts into the Trump way of doing business. So you can't, in the Trump way of doing business, cut a check without an invoice. So you needed an invoice. And of course, the invoice couldn't be for real reimbursement. And they had to phony it up and make it seem for legal services. But as McConney testified, never in his life has he seen a reimbursement for that. That would be, something you would just pay like you would pay your lawyers. And they had other instances of Trump paying, legal amounts to lawyers. And it's a different kind of thing, but they jammed it in, that they took the square peg and jammed it in the round hole. And basically from the time that Weisselberg okayed it, and we believe it was in a conversation involving Weisselberg, Trump, and Cohen. And it's interesting, if I can think of one fairly big piece of evidence that Cohen will have to carry on his own, it's this one. There's corroboration of almost 360 degrees, but here's a piece where I think Cohen's going to say, Weisselberg, I, and Trump talked this through. Here's what we, decided on, but you can't get Trump to testify to it. I don't think you can get Weisselberg, who will just, has shown, very clearly he'll lie for Trump and go to jail, and they don't want to sort of, I think, take the chance. So that will be one in which, the jury will have to depend on Cohen. And Cohen, again, is taking an anticipatory beating from all corners. And we'll see, but just the same way Pecker was, in a kind of a roguish way, clearly telling the truth, Cohen is telling the truth, so that's a big advantage in terms of credibility, when you're actually telling the truth. And I think the jury may buy the story wholeheartedly. But one thing they can't say now, there's just no room left to say that Cohen did this on his own, because we have all the calculations coming from and on paper Weisselberg. And that means, by the way, as I suggested on Friday, that Hope Hicks knew And the jury will know that Donald Trump lied to Hicks when he told her in March that, Cohen had done this out of the goodness of his heart. So, for crimes that are basically anchored in the false and fraudulent mislabeling of paper, that this was a chunky afternoon because you went through a lot of it. It was necessarily a little repetitive because there are many invoices to march through, but I think it had a lot of important evidence, and as I suggested, kind of obliterates any argument that they could try to make that somehow it was Cohen acting on his own. It's now very much up to Weisselberg, and maybe there'd be a suggestion, but good luck with that from everything we've heard about the Trump organization and Weisselberg, that somehow Weisselberg was doing this, on his own or with Cohen. It really, all fingers now really do begin to point to Trump. And while there are ways to try to construct reasonable doubt and different questions about Trump's knowledge of certain individual things, although, by the way, of these 12 checks to Cohen, he signs 9 of them while in the White House, these $35,000 monthly payments. But there's not much room, I think, left for the defense to tell a compelling story to create a reasonable doubt. We learned at the end of the court day that the prosecution thinks it'll be quicker than they had suggested. They think their case only has a couple weeks to go. That's their case. And then, of course, there's a defense case, except I don't think there's much, if anything, to the defense case because axiom number 1, Trump won't testify. And one more point, which is I think conventional wisdom has to be you don't want Michael Cohen going last or near to it, because if there's a really rough cross-examination, that's the last impression left with the jury. And if you sort of do the math, that strikes me that we will be hearing from, this is, I won't bet the farm, but it's very different from the conventional wisdom. So I will pat myself on the back if it turns out to be right, that we will be hearing from Cohen sooner than people anticipate. People are confidently saying no way this week. I'm thinking like Thursday. We'll see. But that's the story for a pretty solid, not scintillating, but solid, important, and actually scintillating with the gag order part of the morning. By and large, another strong day for the prosecution, and they're really painting Trump increasingly into a corner because now the really only supposition he could grasp for would have something to do with Weisselberg acting on his own, or completely contrary to everything we've heard and heard again today about his micromanagerial ways and his insistence on making all decisions, especially as they concern money. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.